Hello there, Tom Maguire. I'm going to do a quick review on the book No Time Like the Future, An Optimist Considers Mortality by the legend that is Michael J. Fox. Now, before I get into the review, I just want to talk about something very quickly. Um, this channel is a book review channel, but it's also very much about personal development. I read as many books as I possibly can to improve myself, but also to help you and to help as many people as I possible get the message of the very best type of personal development there is. And I get that from not just strictly personal development self-help books, but from biographies, from non-fiction, even from fiction books occasionally, if there's a kind of moral message there potentially. And one of the techniques that I use, that I talk about when I'm coaching people in particular, I think for me, it works really well when I'm making decisions, or when I'm faced with a difficult decision, or if I find myself doing something or acting in a way that I know instinctively isn't necessarily the best. I will stop and I will ask myself, would the 10-year-old version of me be happy with that? Or what would the 10-year-old version of me want my future self to do or behave like in that situation? I personally find that's really, really helpful because it just gives me a bit of a kick up the backside. It just kind of reminds me that actually I was once a young kid full of hopes and dreams and certain ambitions and a certain amount of naivety, of course, when you're that age, but kind of, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes I think we let go of our inner child far too quickly, and I think it can just be a really useful way of reminding ourselves that we need to try a bit harder. So I'm going to be quite honest now, there's going to be very little negativity in this review because Michael J. Fox and his Back to the Future films were literally one of the best things ever when I was a kid. They absolutely influenced me in a positive way. I don't think we can underestimate the importance and the significance of good film when we're kids, particularly, even when we're adults as well. You know, you get people who say that film doesn't have any influence. It absolutely does, or it certainly did for me, and it does for lots of people that I know as well. They hugely influenced me. I like to think in positive ways. I don't really have very many heroes, even as a kid particularly, but Michael J. Fox was one of them in those films. I just thought he was absolutely fantastic. I know people talk about actors, actresses, and they say they don't want to be defined by these one films and they don't want people to keep going on about the same thing. But I think whether you like it or not, when you make something that is so iconic and such a positive influence on so many people, I think, and I'm sure Michael J. Fox would agree with me on this. I'd love to think he was watching this, by the way. I'd literally make my year. I don't think he would necessarily, but if he was, I'd almost cry with happiness. That's how sad it is. But no, no, I'd love to think he was. But anyway, I think what I'm saying is I'm pretty sure he would agree that no matter how much you want to be recognized as an actor who can do many things and is flexible and all the rest of it, I think when you do something that is hugely positively influential, you kind of have to accept that that is pretty cool, basically. So as a kid, I was just absolutely blown away by all three of the Back to the Future films. I just absolutely love them. Me and my brother just used to watch them, dream about the DeLorean, time travel, being as cool as him. You know, he's an absolute legend. It's so brilliant. So this is actually the first book of his that I've read, which I was a little bit surprised about when I kind of thought about it, because this is his fourth book, apparently his fourth one since 2000. I am going to read some of his others now after reading this one. So he was, just quick lowdown, I was 17 in 1998 when he was diagnosed. He announced he'd been diagnosed 7 years previously, and he was 29 at the time. Obviously, as a 17-year-old, my head was up my own backside. I was more interested in driving and going out with my mates and getting drunk and seeing girls and all the rest of it. I didn't really care too much about anything else, but I do remember hearing in the news that this happened to Michael J. Fox, and it was just one of those things. It was like, what a bummer. That's horrible, childhood hero. But as a 17-year-old, you don't really have a great deal of kind of perspective on things at that stage. But I do remember it happening or hearing about it. Obviously, another of my heroes, Christopher Reeve. I don't want to compare them because it's a bit of a basic kind of comparison, but Christopher Reeve was another absolute hero of mine. I used to love the Superman films as well. Again, was just like blown away by them. So they were the two things in my childhood really growing up, the 80s and 90s. So again, hearing about him, breaking his neck in an accident and just becoming paralysed and stuff. Just like a couple of real sort of like reality checks at quite a young age. It's kind of like, wow, that can happen clearly to absolutely anyone. That's pretty frightening, to say the least. Yeah, this book is just basically, it's kind of cheering and warming and funny, but there's just so many good examples, I think, that are really relevant to personal development. If you take your personal development seriously, of how you can be a better person, the way Michael J. Fox kind of talks about the disease and how he's dealt with it, but also some of the other things that have happened as well. So he had a tumour on his spine that had to be operated on. He's had falls. He's had all sorts of horrible setbacks that have been alongside the Parkinson's. This book is Michael J. Fox talking about some of the things that have happened alongside, and his perspective on mortality, on getting older, on family and friends, and all those really important, really interesting things. He talks about some really interesting stuff. I've worked in social care now for nearly 20 years. Me and my wife have got a social care consultancy and training business, which we've had for 6 years now. So we very much get to go into care homes, elder care homes, but care homes and supported living for people with learning disabilities as well, and people who just can't support themselves through brain injuries and what have you. So we've got a lot of experience of Parkinson's disease and different things, Alzheimer's, learning disabilities, all sorts of things. I'm not necessarily putting them on all under the same umbrella, but people who kind of need support. And obviously Michael J. Fox supports himself, but he has help from his wife, his family, and whatever as well. So it's just really interesting from that perspective, from a social care perspective, of some of the things he's talking about. And he talks about having his wheelchair, being in his wheelchair and having no control, and how he feels when people are pushing him and kind of just sticking him in a corner, and how he's got this voice that he feels as though no one can hear him. And I just think that really struck me, because I see that so much. I go into care homes, and the idea of what we do is we go in to try to raise standards and we're paid to go in and be honest, basically, and just say to people that your staff aren't doing this right, your management aren't doing this right, this needs to be better, blah, blah, blah. We can be as hard as we like, basically, because that's what we're paid to do. So there's no kind of compromise on that. And one of the things I would very quickly say would be about making sure people have as much control as possible, and that their things are person-centered as possible. The person is making as many choices as they possibly can, even if it's not in their best interest a lot of the time, potentially. And when you hear Michael J. Fox talk about that really kind of struck a chord with me, because it's the sort of thing you see a lot. People who are supported or cared for, quite often the staff just go into kind of robotic sort of switch off mode, where they just move them around, or they just do things for them, or they talk about them in front of them. It's not necessarily done deliberately. What the carers themselves need to be really aware of, because it can have a real profound effect on people. And I just think the way he talked about that was really nice to hear, really important to hear. That really struck a chord. He talks about giving up alcohol, how he was drinking quite a lot of and he said that his wife just looked at him one day, and he said the thing that frightened him was that she was just so bored. I just said to him, is this what you want? And that kind of kicked him out of it and made him start to make positive changes, and he hasn't drunk since then, basically, which is really good to hear. He says something about his wife not being a rock, because rocks are hard and cold and things, and I can't remember exactly what else it was he said, but that bit particularly struck a chord with me as well, because he's kind of saying that, she supports him and she accepts him for who he is, even though that's kind of in flux and that changes quite frequently. And for that, he just can't be more grateful, basically, which was lovely. He talks about not being able to sleep very well once he's woken up, because the Parkinson's obviously makes him quite agitated, and the movement and the shaking is really difficult. So that was hard to listen to. There's something that his father-in-law, Stephen, used to say to him. He says that with gratitude, optimism becomes sustainable, which I thought was really nice. And I've just kind of been thinking about that a little bit. This is one of those books that I haven't rushed on to the next one, because I've kind of wanted to absorb it and think about it a little bit. And I just kind of think so many people would probably say, what a shame this has happened to Michael J. Fox. He had such a bright future ahead of him and blah, blah, blah. And I just think, actually, I don't really see it that way, personally. It's not really for me to see it anyway. It's for him. It's his life. It's his future. It's his things that he's potentially missed out on, his things that he's potentially gained. But I just think, from my own opinionated point of view, I just think, well, actually, what an incredible legacy to leave. He started the Michael J. Fox Foundation. So he's responsible for loads of research into Parkinson's, and just making how much better to make a really positive change to a horrible disease that afflicts lots of people in a really horrible way. How much better to do that than just to have lived a kind of healthy life where maybe he made potentially more films, maybe he had potentially more success, I suppose. I don't know if how you define success. I don't know, who am I to say which way he would have gone necessarily, but a lot of stars, become kind of corrupted a little bit by their success potentially. Maybe him having this happen to him has caused him to be an even better version of himself than he might have been before. Don't know, maybe not. That's just, I'm kind of talking in a way, like I said, I talk about personal development, I talk about these things, I have my own opinion on things, and I don't know him, obviously, but I'm just sort of almost seeing it from my own point of view. I just sort of think, how do you relate to these things? It's, in some ways, it's absolutely hideous, it's horrendous, but in other ways, actually, we've all got to die one day, haven't we? Which is a horrible truth. We've all got to get old and become less physically able and capable than we once were. And he talks a lot about that in the book, which I found really interesting, because he was clearly a really physically fit and agile young man who could kind of do anything at one point. He talks about the average age of Parkinson's patients being about 56, I think, and so he's kind of roughly that age now, and he sort of says how he's basically been that age now for the last 20 years or so. Forgive me if those figures are wrong, but it was something like that. I'm talking from memory. Yeah, so I just sort of think, what a fantastic legacy to leave. It's like we all have to get old, we all have to deteriorate, unfortunately, and actually he's doing something that's literally going to be there for years and years after he's gone. How many of us can say that? He's going to be absolutely immortalised by the Back to the Future films, which just bring joy to loads and loads of people. It's an absolute cult of a film. It's something that will have a positive influence on me in a weird way, in lots of weird ways that I could talk about, but we'd be here for absolutely ages if I went into all of those. I just found it a real feel-good kind of inspirational film. There are scenes in that film, music in that film, that just kind of give you that sort of warmth and pickup that you need when you're feeling a little bit down. And he talks about television as well, and the power of television, when he just wants to get away from things and just sit and watch stuff. And I really thought about that, and I just thought, when I'm older and stuff, I will watch those old films like my dad does and stuff, the old westerns and things like that. I'll sit down and I'll watch Back to the Future, and I'll feel nostalgic, and I'll feel warmth and kind of tinge of sadness for the past, I suppose, but also gratitude as well. And I just think, fantastic, what a legacy to leave. He's made a seriously positive difference. He talks in a way like he's quite hard on himself sometimes as well, so I'm sure, I think because he's a decent guy, he recognises his flaws as well, and some of the shitty things he's done to people, where he's maybe been a little bit selfish here and there, not taking enough care of himself potentially when he should have done potentially. So it's just a really honest kind of account of things, and it just feels like he's your mate talking to you. And I listened to the audio version as well, with him talking, which is absolutely fantastic. At times he's a little bit difficult to understand because obviously his speech is affected, so you do have to listen maybe a little bit more carefully than you would normally, but it's no big deal. It's just, again, just another observation. It's fun. You wouldn't swap it. You wouldn't have anyone else speaking. It's fantastic to hear him, basically. And I mean that genuinely, not in a patronising way. I think he's brilliant, basically. At the end, he talks about seeing Vampire Weekend as well, out with his family. And I thought that for me, that was weird, because I've just recently, I absolutely love Vampire Weekend. I saw them years ago at the Eden Project, where I live in Cornwall, and it was just fantastic. It was a summer's day. They were a new band. No one really knew about them at the time. And I just thought it's just such melodic, fantastic music. They're absolutely brilliant. And recently, I think it was about a week ago or so, it was before I read the book or listened to the book, I listened to some of their songs through YouTube. One of them's called Harmony Hall, and I absolutely love it. It's my favourite song of the year. It's like my favourite song. I mean, I'm listening to it all the time. It's so uplifting and melodic, and the guitar in it is fantastic. And he talks about it. He talks about Harmony Hall, and he talks about the lyrics in it and stuff, and what is the lyric? I don't want to live like this, but I don't want to die, or something. And he says how he's pondered that and thought about it, and that just kind of hit me a little bit. I felt a bit nicely weird from that, because I just kind of really related to it. I just thought, wow, I've just been listening to this, and Michael J. Fox likes it as well. That's really cool. So yeah, massive. I love him to bits for the Back to the Future films. I think he's fantastic, and I love this book as well. And I'll listen to or read his other stuff as well. In fact, I've asked my brother to buy me the hard copy of the book for Christmas, so I can read it as well, because often, like I said before, I find there's not a lot of difference between listening to a book and reading it. But I sometimes, if I really enjoy a book, if I really like it, I will read it as well. So There's loads more I can say about it, but I don't like to give spoilers. I've probably already given a couple of little spoilers, to be fair, but I don't like to give spoilers if I can help it. So there's loads more I can say about it. I had it in my head before I started speaking in front of the camera that I was going to say lots of different things, but basically, to sum it up, absolutely love the guy, massive respect for him, huge inspiration for me. I think he's a huge inspiration for other people as well. It's a really warm, funny, enjoyable book to read or to listen. Well, I can't say to read, I haven't read it yet, but I will read it. But to listen to, it's fantastic. Absolutely brilliant, basically. What an inspiration, and again, someone that we can, I think, learn a lot from in a positive way, basically. So if he is listening, that would be absolutely brilliant. That would literally make my year. I don't want to be too gushing and pathetic, but it would be fantastic to think that Michael J. Fox had actually seen one of my reviews. That'd be great. But if not, anyway, he's a proper legend. It's a really good book. I really recommend it. Thanks again for listening. Speak again soon. Cheers.